भगवति हेशिति कण्ठकुटुम्बिनि भूरि कुटुम्बिनि भूरि कृते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते।
Om Asato Ma Satkamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So today we take up the third and the final section of this book of Chandi. The overall story, this is the third story that the sage will tell the merchant and the king. The overall pattern of the story is identical. In each of the stories we have seen so far, we saw that there is some demon who stands for the force of evil and destruction, and how the power of the divine comes and destroys that force. There are some very subtle variations. In the first part, we saw that the demons were Madhu and Kaitaba, who predominantly were just brute force. It was very there isn't that many details known about Madhu and Kaitaba in the first part. All that we know is that they were bad, that they were filled with pride, pretty gross form of evil. In the second part, the demon was Mahishasura. And there we saw pride, arrogance, anger, how the evil, the different forms that evil or the powers of darkness can take. The manifestation of the tamasic power, Shakti, was more evident in the first part. The rajasic manifestation of the power was more evident in the second part. The third part that we are going to study today shows the sattvic aspect of the Shakti, how it destroys the evil. The evil that is represented in the third part takes the form of two demons called Shumbha and Nishumbha. The story about Shumbha and Nishumbha is that their mother was Diti, and that's why the children of Diti are called Daityas, and which is translated in English as demons. So these two, they were brothers, Shumbha and Nishumbha. We read that they did lot of austerities, and Brahma, that aspect of the divine which is identified with creating a new cycle of creation, he was very pleased by their austerities and blessed them and said, ask for a boon. And then these two demons asked for immortality and eternality. And Brahma said, no, that you won't get that. Now there's some interesting things here, that although these two asuras, they have clearly very negative propensities within them, but in order to find a way to advance in life, they don't just begin in what we would say is what we would expect would be a destructive way and just go and conquer. They actually practice austerities to please a divine force. Now that seems a bit unusual, but that's not that unusual in the mythologies that have evolved in the Indian subcontinent. that that is what Swami Vivekananda said, that religion and spirituality is the backbone of India, of people in that part of the world. The reason is that no matter what people have to do, of course, good people will turn to spirituality. That's not surprising. But that even people who want to steal and people who want to cheat, that they would also pray, that doesn't seem that common. But that was not that unusual in not just in mythology, but in stories and folklore and songs. It's pretty common to see how even gangs of robbers, I don't know how much they do it nowadays, they still might, but they had their own shrines. They went and prayed before going for some expedition to go and cheat and loot and kill. The idea was there was a belief that there are certain higher powers which need to be propitiated when their own desires, no matter what form those desires took, had to be fulfilled. In any case, we see this Shumbha and Nishumbha, the two demons, practice austerities for a long time. Brahma was pleased, and then they asked for immortality. And of course, Brahma was able to see that giving immortality to these people is not good for creation. And so he said, no, ask for something else. You don't qualify for that. And then these two demons thought they are smart. So they thought, let me ask for immortality in a different sort of way. Let me ask the same thing, but make it appear as if I'm asking for something else. And so they said, okay, if you cannot give us immortality, here is this. Give us a boon that we will not be killed. Our end will not come in the hands of any male deity or any human being or any animals. So they thought that pretty much exhausted all the possibilities of ever dying. And they just discounted the power of women, that any woman would be strong enough or would be capable of killing them. So they left that loophole and thought that this is as good as asking for immortality. And so Brahma said, okay, that boon is granted. So in some sense, they kind of signed off on their own death warrant, so to speak, making it clear who could kill them. And eventually, as we will see, no surprise that it is the goddess who was not included in any of those categories. She is not a male deity, she is not a human being, she is not an animal, and so she kills them. So that's the backstory for these two demons. So they became very powerful. All the other very powerful demons of their time all recognized the great power of Shumbha and Nishumbha. And so some big names are mentioned in the books about how all these other demons came and said, you are our king. So they became the lords of all demons. Now clearly, when these kind of conquerors, when they acquire power over a certain area, it's very difficult to remain satisfied with what you have. So they wanted to expand their kingdom. And so having conquered the netherworlds, or Patala, as it is called in many Indian languages and in Sanskrit as well, so they now turned their eyes towards the heavens, the celestial worlds. And that's where then the younger brother, Nishumbha, goes and attacks king of the gods, was Indra. and there's a big, very fierce battle. But Indra's thunderbolt, Vajra, was able to not exactly kill Nishumbha, but he falls unconscious. Then the other brother, who's generally depicted as more powerful of the two, he then marches and goes to the heaven, and he was able to vanquish the armies of the gods. And then he becomes the new Indra. He sits on the throne of Indra and conquers the celestial world as well. And then we read that all of the wealth and the weaponry and everything became theirs. And as it happened in earlier stories, all these gods and Indras, they are again left to their own devices. And then they go. This time, they go and straight go and invoke the goddess. In the first two parts, whenever they found themselves in a trouble of this sort, they would go to Shiva or Vishnu. But there's a verse which comes in the earlier sections where the Devi tells them that in future, whenever you have any difficulty, whenever you have any calamity, call for me. And I'm here to protect you. I'm here to guide you. And that was the assurance given by the Devi not only to them, but through them to all of us. And that is what many worshippers of the Divine Mother have found, that whenever they have any difficulty, any challenges, that if they go and pray to the Divine Mother, she will be there. And for many of us, when we were little babies, that seems to be the most natural thing to do. A little child, if it needs something, if it feels afraid, the child would immediately call for mother. I don't know how universal it is. Probably it is, but whenever in danger, people tend to remember the mother more than father. Some big research can be done on why this should be so. Maybe the mother is just more powerful, I guess. That is one very simple, direct explanation. In a most poignant sort of way, in a most recent example, very painful, very tragic, is when George Floyd was pinned down by the cops, and the last words he uttered was again calling out to his mother. So there is something about this assurance that the Divine Mother gave to these other gods and said, whenever you are in difficulty, just call me and I'll come. And this promise, this assurance seems so fresh now as it remained fresh over the centuries. Many of the students of Ramakrishna's life and the life of Holy Mother and Swamiji, many in the Vedanta tradition, have also found, even from among our contemporaries, that whenever they were in difficulty, sure, we can pray to whichever form of the divine we feel connected with. And many have found that the power of the Mother, as represented by Holy Mother, Sharda Devi, many have found that praying to her has brought them, has filled their heart with that strength, with that courage, with that assurance. So it's a very living, powerful promise made by the Mother to the deities. And so all these gods go straight to her. And so this third section, which begins with chapter 5, really begins with this story about Shumbha and Nishumbha having conquered the heavens and the gods going and seeking the help of the Devi and to invoke her, to seek her help. There's a beautiful hymn on chapter 5. So let me read a few verses to you from chapter 5, beginning with verse 14. Ya Devi sarvabhuteshu Vishnumayeti Shabdita Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi sarvabhuteshu Chetanetyabhidhiyate Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi sarvabhuteshu buddhirupena samsthita Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi sarvabhuteshu nidrarupena samsthita Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi sarvabhuteshu kshudha-rupena samsthita Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi sarvabhuteshu chaya-rupena samsthita Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. So this prayer includes a section. It's much longer. I've just read a few verses, which shows the presence of the mother, presence of the divine energy, divine power in everything that we see, everything within, everything outside, everything that is visible, everything that is invisible. How the mother is present in everything. And Namastasyai, Namastasyai, Namastasyai Namo Namaha means we bow down to you, we salute you again and again and again. And in the first line, the presence of the mother in everything in this world is invoked. For instance, it says, salutations again and again to the Devi who abides in all beings as consciousness, to the Devi who abides in all beings in the form of intelligence, to the Devi who abides in all beings in the form of sleep, in the form of hunger, in the form of reflection, in the form of power, in the form of thirst, in the form of forgiveness, in the form of genius, in the form of modesty, in the form of peace, in the form of faith. So there are all this thing. In fact, the list goes, it's quite big. In the form of loveliness, in the form of good fortune, in the form of activity, in the form of memory, in the form of compassion, in the form of contentment, in the form of mother, in the form of error, in the form of the elements, and so on. So this is just a part of the prayer. So when the gods go and invoke the Devi and tell her of their woes, then the Devi says, I'm here for you. The Devi appears before them. And again, there's a beautiful description of how the resplendent, the all-pervading big form of the Devi, compassionate, at the same time fierce to those who have reason to fear from her. That form of the Devi appears before them. Now, when this invocation of the Devi was going on, and so two of the servants, two of the attendants of Shumbha and Nishumbha, by name Chanda and Munda, they were passing by that area. And they suddenly hear the sound of music and singing and invocation, and they were kind of curious about what's going on. And there they beheld this very beautiful, adorable, lovely form of the Divine Mother, of the goddess. And they were amazed. And they rush back to their bosses, Shumbha and Nishumbha, and they narrate to them everything that they saw. And they said, as we were going, and here we saw this very attractive, very beautiful woman, and never has anyone seen a woman more beautiful than that, more attractive than that. And then they tell their bosses, you are the Lord of the universe. You own the nether worlds, you own the celestial worlds, and this woman should not be anywhere other than with you. She belongs to you, and you should have her as your wife. And then Shumbha and Nishumbha say, well, of course, that just makes complete sense. If there is someone who is so powerful, so exceedingly beautiful, then of course she has to be with the Lord of the universe. And so they tell these attendants, okay, go and let that beautiful woman know who we are. Tell them about our power, our strength, that we are the Lord's. And in short, go with the proposal, marriage proposal on our behalf, and bring her to us. And Shumbha and Nishumbha are very certain, of course, by their credentials, any woman would want to be with them. And so they ask these attendants, go and bring her to us. And then these two attendants go and tell the Devi, the goddess, tell her, we have come from Shumbha and Nishumbha, our bosses. And then they kind of sing their glories and say how wonderful they are, how great they are, how powerful they are. And we want you to be their wife. So we have come to take you so that you can be a part of their household. And the Devi says, well, of course it makes sense. They are so powerful and they are so great. And then I can completely understand why you would want to come and propose on their behalf. Then she says something very interesting. So let me read those verses to you. So this is what the Devi tells those attendants of Shumbha and Nishumbha. Satyamuktam tvaya natra mithya kinchit tvayoditam त्रैलोक्याधिपति शुंभो निशुंभश्चापि तादृशः किं त्वत्र यत्परिज्ञातं मिथ्या तत्क्रियते कथं श्रूयतामल्पबुद्धित्वात् प्रतिज्ञाया कृता पुरा यो मां जयति संग्रामे यो मे दर्पव्यपोहति यो मे प्रतिबलो लोके समे भर्ता भविष्यति तदा गच्छतु शुंभोऽत्र निशुंभो वा महासुरः मां चित्वा किं चिरेणात्र पाणिं गृह्णातु मे लघु. So what the Devi tells them is this. You have spoken the truth. There is nothing false in what you have said. Shumbha is the ruler of the three worlds, and so also is Nishumbha. But how can I go back on my word? Hear of the vow I once made out of foolishness. He alone who conquers me in battle, who removes my pride, who equals my strength in the world, will become my husband. Therefore, let Shumbha, the great Asura Nishumbha, come here. Why delay? Having conquered me, let him take my hand in marriage. So she says, when I was young girl, when I was speaking with my friends, I foolishly, thoughtlessly made this kind of a vow that I will only marry someone who can defeat me in a battle. And all my friends laughed at me and said, what a silly kind of resolution to make. But she said, unfortunately, when I was very young, I was very proud of my strength, and I thought no one could beat me, no one could conquer me. And those of you who have teenagers at home know that that's how teenagers think. They are the best. And so that's what she said. At that, she said, no one can conquer me. And so she said, I made that vow. So I want to hold that vow. So if Shumbha and Nishumbha would want to come and marry me, great. Let them just come and defeat me, and so that I can keep my vow, and then they can have me as their wife as well. And so the attendants are furious. This was not the reply they were ready for. This was not the reply they thought was possible. They thought, just mention it and anyone would come running. So they said, you don't know what you're saying. If we now go back empty-handed, if we now return without you, we will be in trouble and you will be in even greater trouble. But of course, she says, unfortunately, no. But this is my vow, and I need to keep it. And so the Shumbha then comes, and then there is a fierce battle, and the book says that the battle goes on for like 100 years, or something like that. And then again with fierce battle, and then Nishumbha again comes up. So finally, I'll spare you all the details. You can read it in the text. Both of them are finally destroyed. And after they are destroyed, there's another one beautiful hymn. All the gods go and sing this beautiful hymn. Let me read to you a few verses from that hymn. Again, the entire hymns are very beautiful. In the comment section, I have given the list of the 4 places throughout the text where these hymns appear. So if you want to take a look at only the hymns portion of the text, you can look at those references. So let me read to you this, just 3 or 4 verses. This comes in chapter 11. Sarvasya buddhirupena janasya hridi samstite swargapavargade devi narayani namostute kalakasthadirupeena parinamapradayini vishwasya paratau shakte narayani namostute sarvamangalamangalye shive sarvarthasadhike शरण्ये त्र्यंबके गौरी नारायणि नमोस्तुते सृष्टिस्थितिविनाशानां शक्तिभूते सनातनी गुणाश्रये गुणमये नारायणि नमोस्तुते शरणागतदीनार्त परित्राणपरायणे सर्वस्यार्तिहरे देवी नारायणि नमोस्तुते. Some of you will have noticed that these 3 verses that I chanted right now, these are also included in the evening vespers that is done in all the Vedanta centers throughout the world. That is done towards the end. So these are addressed to the Divine Mother. And the verses go like this in translation. Salutations to you, O Devi Narayani, who abides as intelligence in the hearts of all beings, granting heavenly reward and final liberation. Salutation to you, Narayani, who brings change as the moment of ever-passing time, who are the power at the cessation of the universe. Salutation be to you, Narayani, who are the good of all good, the auspicious one. To you, who accomplish every intent, to you, the refuge, the all-knowing, shining Gauri. Salutation be to you, Narayani, who are the power of creation, sustenance, and destruction, who are eternal, who are the source and embodiment of the threefold energy. There's an interesting passage here when she's having this last battle with Shumbha. Shumbha, when he finds he's unable to beat her, unable to conquer her, he finds one excuse, and he says, "Why are you you are not as powerful as you think. You have got all these other goddesses supporting you. If you have real strength, come and fight with me one on one. Now, all this is a little bit ridiculous in some sense, because it's not as if Shumbha was fighting one on one. Before he came, it's in like thousands of generals and armies, they came. But that's the thing about the ego, that we are able to see what is happening outside a little bit more clearly, but we remain completely ignorant about what is happening inside. And so that's what happened to Shumbha. He's seeing outside, and it's true. The Devi and then all these other forms of the goddesses, they were all with her. But he's so self-centered, he's so narcissistic, that he doesn't recognize that on his behalf, all these other demons were fighting. But now, as we know, we have met people in our life, or we have seen among our contemporaries, there are people who can be extremely self-centered. They make everything about themselves. So Shumbha, it's all about him, and he says, I'm alone, and you have got all these goddesses with you. And so, what's the point that I'm one against many? And then the Devi says, you fool, they are not different from me. They are just parts, they are just me in these different forms. And if that is confusing to you, I withdraw my power back into me. And so all these goddesses who had emerged from the Devi entered back into her. And the Devi alone remains. And she said, okay, now I'm alone, and let's have a fight. And of course, she completely vanquishes him. There's several important things we learn from here. That the power of the divine can manifest in many different ways and in many different forms. But ultimately, that doesn't mean that there are many different deities, that there are many different independent goddesses, that they are all form of this one mother. And that can be sometimes bewildering to people who look at Hinduism itself. In the Hindu tradition, there are these so many, which gets translated into English as gods and goddesses, which just feels like, well, it is not a monotheistic tradition, because there is not one god. There are not just one god, there are so many goddesses, there are so many gods. So it just seems it is sometimes called as polytheism. But here is this one among the many, many instances we find in the texts where it shows that these many are not really many. These many are only the manifestations of this one divine figure. So that is what the mother says. A few interesting things to be kept in mind, that Shumbha and Nishumbha here stand for the ego. We saw the early demons in the early parts. They saw the different manifestations of how the negativity within us, that which takes us away from God, can manifest through quest for power, through anger, through arrogance, through pride, through jealousy, through hatred. But at the basis of all of this, the root cause, the source from which everything emerges is the ego. And then we say, why two? Ego can manifest in two ways. There is the primary ego, the I, and there is the secondary ego, the mind. So ego and mind, we could say, is attachment, everything that I appropriate as something that belongs to me. And that is why again and again we see in Ramakrishna's teaching, he says, I and mine, that alone is the primary form of ignorance. And that's the most subtle thing. Sometimes it may be possible for us to minimize and eliminate some of the other negativities of the heart, but the last big barrier, the last big hurdle is the ego. And that's why we have towards the end this big battle with Shumbha and Nishumbha, ego and attachment, I and mine. And when I and mine are completely destroyed, then there is no hurdle anymore, no obstacle anymore. Then that our true eternal nature becomes manifest. Because everything that keeps me limited is the idea of I. Because the moment I say I also see things and people and objects which are not I. So the knowledge of I comes along with the knowledge of not I. And when I say I am limiting myself. Now I'm saying, well, I am sitting here. So I am this. When I say I am this, invariably it means I am not this, I am not this, I am not this, I am not this. So I have become this little me. Now when this I is absent, I am no more little, I am no more small. And we might say, well, how do I know that? How can I be sure of that? I think we can be quite sure of that because we do experience a state when this I is gone or has fallen unconscious, like Nishumbha was, when we are in deep sleep. In Sushupti, there is no sense of I. And because there is no sense of I, we don't feel ourselves limited. When there is sense of I, when we are not asleep, we know, oh, I'm lying in my bed. I'm smaller than my bed. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to be on my bed. So I become very small. But once I fall asleep, deep asleep, then this I vanishes and I'm no longer the little being anymore. Unfortunately, the disappearance of the I in deep sleep is very temporary. When we wake up, the I again comes and we become small again. So every day in a 24-hour cycle, at least for a few minutes, maybe in the dream we are not infinite, clearly, but when we are not even dreaming, every day we are almost becoming infinite. So we become infinite in deep sleep, almost. I say almost because there is still ignorance there. And then we become finite again in dream and waking state. But that's we won't go there. It's a big philosophical discussion in itself. To conclude the story, so after hearing these three stories from the sage, remember the original storyline. That's the king and the trader by name Suratha and Samadhi have gone to the hermitage of this sage. And that's where they wanted to know about when the sage tells them that this power is really of the Shakti, which is what is caused their confusion about their state in life, their stage in life, how the king was driven away from his kingdom, how the trader was betrayed by his family. They both are suffering. And when the sage says, it's the Devi, it's the goddess who can remove your suffering. And through these three stories, he is able to show them the way of how they can get over the suffering that they have been experiencing. And so we read that after receiving this teaching from the sage, both the king and the merchant, they go on the bank of a river and practice austerities for a long time there. And that is where they propitiate the goddess. And pleased by their worship, prayer, meditation, the Devi says, ask whatever you want and I'll give it to you. Now this practice, this receiving the teaching from the sage and doing all these spiritual practices on the river bank, the king has realized that running away from his kingdom was a bad idea, that he was not a true Kshatriya, that his duty was to restore justice. His duty was, if the evil people had taken over his kingdom, then he should have fought there rather than come and found refuge in this hermitage. So when the Devi asks him for a boon, the sage, the king says, give me power so that I can regain my kingdom. I'll fight these enemies who have taken my kingdom. I can get it back. And then, after I die, I will get this eternal kingdom, by which he means moksha. And then the merchant asks the Devi, he has seen through, he has acquired enough discernment, enough viveka, and so he doesn't ask for anything. He doesn't want to go back to where he came from, and he says he just wants to be free. He asks for moksha, and the Devi grants him his boon as well. We see from this that it's possible to say that there was a little bit of a desire to regain his kingdom, a little bit, some remnants of desire remained in the king, which is why he didn't straight away ask for moksha. But that desire was a good desire in the sense that he saw that I need to restore dharma, that I did not keep my dharma by refusing to fight. I should have gone and fought. And so he wanted to complete that remaining part of his dharma, try to restore justice if he could, and then get this eternal kingdom, meaning moksha after death. And so that's where this story ends. There's a lot to reflect on, a lot to think about, but in the limited time that was available to us, I've tried to very briefly give you some of the important points in this text. I would strongly encourage you to read the text fully whenever you find time. This is actually a very good time to read this text. In fact, in the closing chapters of this text, we are told the auspicious times during the year when this text can be read, the benefits. Most of these ancient texts will end with a section which is called Falashruti. Falashruti means, how will I be benefited by a study of this book? How will I be benefited by chanting these verses? Usually they'll have a section which says, this is what you will gain. So that concluding section gives the benefits of studying this text. And the benefits are many. And this text has been around for centuries. And so people who have read it, at least in the original or at least in the translation, whichever way one feels comfortable doing it, or nowadays, because there are so many tapes available, one could even use an audio version of it. Whichever way one does it, and if we do it with faith, with devotion, trying to remember not only the power of the divine as it is manifested in the external world, but more importantly, the divine as it is manifest in our own heart. These demons, no matter what names and forms are described in the text, are not just outside. Well, there are. At least, one thing is this. The demons that are described in this text, they were not difficult to recognize. The descriptions are there. Their appearance and then the way they talked was very clear that they are demons. It's no suspense there at all. The times in which we live are more difficult. The demons have hidden themselves. So you can no longer see a person and immediately recognize the person had their demonic forces controlling that person. So outward appearances can be very deceptive. And so the demons have now become very subtle. They have gone inside. So we need the ability to not just get carried away by appearances, to kind of look inside. And before we have the ability to look inside other people, we need the ability to look inside our own selves. So if we look within, we will find plenty of demons right here. There wouldn't be any time or interest in looking at other people's demons. If one has the spare time to do it, they are welcome to do it. But this is that life's work in itself, taking care of the demons within us. Luckily, there are not just demons within us. Inside our heart, along with demons, there are gods as well. So there are these forces of good and forces of evil. There are our strengths and these are our weaknesses. Now, presiding over both our strengths and our weaknesses is the power of the divine. So the more we take refuge, the more we surrender to the divine in our own heart, to the God dwelling in our own heart, the forces of good, our strengths get more strengthened and our weaknesses are one by one vanquished, the way the goddess vanquished all the demons in this story. So that's the beauty of this text. It invites us, it encourages us to look within and see the battleground in our own heart. And that's why this is not a book study of history. It's a study of a reality that is playing itself out right now, at this very moment, inside the hearts of every one of us. So the relevance and the power of this text are immense. And that's the message that comes to us, and that's the message that will help us in this time, and especially during this season of the awakened presence of the Divine Mother. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. Let's take a look at the questions. Do the names Shumbha and Nishumbha mean something? Also, is there a significance to two of them versus one? Shumbha and Nishumbha, I'm sure it means something, but I don't know what it means right now. But maybe if we do some research, we might be able to find what it means. The two of them, because, as I said, commentators sometimes identify them with ego and attachment, I and mine. And so therefore they are described as brothers. And they brothers who love each other very much. In fact, when the proposal is sent in the beginning, with the attendants, the idea is to tell the Devi, here are two of us, you can choose whoever you wish to marry. So these two brothers are very close to one another, and they are willing to lay down their life for one another. And indeed they do. Which is to show that I and mine always go together. You cannot separate them. If one goes, the other goes as well. I is more persistent, clearly. But if we are able to eliminate attachment from our life, then it becomes easier to remove the hold of ego on our life. Sometimes we make the mistake of trying to minimize the ego without first minimizing attachments. And so sometimes it is helpful to transform everything that we see as I into mine. Now this is going to sound odd. What I mean is, as much as it is possible, if we can transform our ego into our attachment, things become a little bit easy. In other words, what I have is a little bit easier to let go than who I am. And one example that I have often given on earlier occasions as well is, if I am, say, walking alone on a road and carrying some precious thing. Let's say I've got a new iPhone and I'm just walking, and there's another person who suddenly comes in the dark, sticks a gun into my back, and then says, "Give me that phone or your life or your new phone." I don't think there's going to be a lot of debate. Clearly, we don't want to lose our phone, but we don't want to lose our life either. So if I have to choose between my life and my phone, it's pretty obvious I'm going to say my life and give away the phone. It is easier to give away my phone than to give away my life, because the phone is what I have. The phone is what belongs to me. But giving away of life is just end of me as I understand it now. And therefore, I want to hold on to myself, but I'm willing to let go of what belongs to me. So that's why I said that it is easier to let go what I have than to let go who I am. Now, just as the phone is precious to me, if I start looking upon my body as another possession of mine, just like a phone is a possession, the body is a possession. Now, I might still be attached to my body, but being attached to the body in some weird sort of way is better than thinking I am the body. So, if I can continue to take care of my body and my mind with as much care and attention I give to my car, to my home, to whatever other precious possessions I have, that's fine. Because a body is my possession, a mind is my possession, a car is my possession, a home is my possession. And there is a little bit of a openness within us to accept the possibility that I might lose my possession someday. It's easier to let go of it if I see it is something that I have than if I am. And so that's why it's kind of good to keep in mind these two things. Ego and attachment, I or mine, that is represented by Shumbha and Nishumbha here. Why does the goddess sometimes appear to be more powerful than Shiva or Vishnu? Because she is, I think so. All power is in the goddess. Shiva and Vishnu seen as the substratum, as the infinite being, which doesn't do anything. An infinite being simply is. The Sat, Sat Chit Ananda, the Sat is simply being. Now, in order to do something, that being has to be activated. And that activation of that infinite, immovable, unchangeable reality is what the mother is. And so therefore, by definition, even philosophically, all power is in the mother. And therefore, mother is powerful. In fact, in the Chandi, remember in the Shumbha Nishumbha story, the attendants were sent as messengers of Shumbha and Nishumbha to the Devi with the proposal that she could marry either of these two brothers. In the course of those battles, the Devi sent Shiva as her messenger to these demons, telling them whatever needs to be told. And therefore, one of the names of the Divine Mother is Shiva Duti, one whose messenger is Shiva. Now, it's very interesting that Shiva, who is seen as the supreme being, in this text is only a messenger of Shiva. And there is a funny story that's often shared among these very proverbial fights and debates they had between Vaishnavas and Shaktas, the worshippers of Krishna and the worshippers of the Devi. And so here is this one anecdote that is sometimes told, that the Vaishnava, the worshipper of Krishna, so they have a saying which means that this ocean of samsara, Krishna alone can carry me in his boat across this ocean of samsara. And so when this was told to a worshipper of the Devi, to provoke that worshipper of Devi, when this Vaishnava says, Krishna alone can take me across this ocean of samsara, and then the worshipper of Devi, the Shakta, says, I totally agree with you. That's exactly how it is. And the Vaishnava is confused. You agree with me that Krishna alone can take me across the ocean of samsara? And then the worshipper of the goddess says, absolutely, you are right. And then he says, look, my divine mother, the goddess, she is the empress of the whole universe. She presides over the whole universe. She is not going to carry every little person across the ocean. She has just employed this boatman called Krishna and says, order him, take these people across. So I agree with you that Krishna is taking. So again, it's funny, there are lots of stories like this, but the idea is the power resides in the Devi. In fact, in one place, Sri Ramakrishna says, all incarnations are incarnations of Shakti. Now, generally, we speak incarnations, at least as they are enumerated traditionally, are usually seen to be male figures. And usually there is a feminine counterpart, which is called a Shakti. Now, sometimes the Shakti seems to have a kind of a secondary place to the male deity. In some traditions, the male and the female are equal. But there is always this power dynamic for people who want to kind of look at it from the perspective of a gender. But the reality is, the supreme being who is immovable, unchangeable, that just the existence itself, there is no incarnation there. That being simply is all the time, beyond time, space, and causality. The moment we speak about incarnation, we are seeing an activated form of divinity. So there is a power, there is movement there. And if there is movement, there is a Shakti in play. So Sri Ramakrishna said, all the incarnations are really incarnations of Shakti. So there again, all power therefore resides in the mother. Is Raktabija a personification of the hatred, terrorism, fundamentalism, and bigotry in the world? They seem to emerge and strengthen with every effort to subdue them. I think, yeah, sure. It's possible to look upon all these social evils as a form of Raktabija. Absolutely. Is asking for moksha as a boon considered a selfish act? Because we are asking for our own salvation rather than asking blessings for the beneficial of all beings. It's generally not seen as selfish, because if I'm just thinking of it in selfish terms, I will not get moksha. Moksha becomes possible only when this little self is completely gone. And so, by definition, even if a slightest tinge of selfishness has remained within me, I can ask for moksha, but I won't get it. So if I ask for moksha, if I'm eligible for moksha, and if I'm given moksha, that will happen only when I'm completely unselfish. And if you want to get even more philosophical about it, it would be that moksha, when this little I has to die, as we saw, in order for me to get moksha, when the little I dies, there are no these other beings. the other remains only as long as this little I remains. So when I become completely selfless, then there are really no other beings. Everything becomes one. If I'm free, everything, whatever appears as everything, everything is free. It's a little bit like, think about it this way. Let's say we are sleeping, and in the dream we see that we are in the midst of a great calamity, that people are suffering, and I am among the many people who are suffering in the dream. And I wake up from that dream. Now, is my waking up a selfish act? Should I start grieving or feeling guilty about it for waking up, for thinking that, oh, I have woken up, my suffering has ended, but what about all these other people I saw in my dream who are suffering? They are continuing to suffer. I should not have woken up and freed myself. We wouldn't say that, right? So that's how we should try to understand this. How to do a full surrender of our ego to the Lord. Well, this is really the basic practice in spiritual life. And there's a lot that can be said about it. One way clearly is to sincerely practice the 4 yogas, or whichever of these yogas we would feel like practicing. The second way is to follow the instructions of our Guru as best we can. And something that we can do immediately right now is not feel so important. I think the more important people feel they are, the stronger the hold the ego has on them. So I think we should not take ourselves too seriously. Yeah, take yourself seriously enough, but not too seriously. If we remember that I am just one of the billions in this world, that people like me are being born every second, and people like me are dying every second in this world, and the world just goes on. It doesn't stop for anyone. It's good to think like this now and then, to loosen the hold of the ego on ourselves. So there are many different ways to do it, but these are a few of the ways we could practice. What force impels us to identify the demons inside us, or make us introspect more instead of looking outside? It's the force of reflection, the force of understanding, the power of reflection, the power of understanding. And that is what the Devi is. The power of understanding, the power of looking deep within, the power of making sense of what is happening with this earth, that power also belongs to the Devi. So it is the force that comes through as it is personified or deified in our mind in the form of the goddess. So it is our own higher self getting activated, which helps us look within and find the demons. Now, a little bit of a space has to be created. And that's why even in order to do self-introspection well, some amount of loosening of the ego is very essential. Extremely egoistic people cannot do that kind of self-analysis, that self-reflection. They might analyze other people. They might judge other people. But if I have to start judging myself, if I have to start analyzing my own intentions, then I need to create a little bit of a space between me in order for me to look at myself. And that can happen only when the ego is not so strong. Last week you distinguished between history and myth, the latter being about now and within us. In this sense, can the Chandi be considered primarily a text on yoga? Absolutely. I think it's possible to study myths as just some collection of interesting stories, But of course, a spiritual benefit can come when we study myths by understanding their inner implication, what they represent. And so in that sense, yes, it is a book of yoga. While all forms are just the manifestation of one, why is it that only the manifestation in female form comes with more love, compassion, and kindness? Well, that's how it does get represented generally, but I don't think this is completely true. We see, of course, love, compassion, and kindness even in male figures. We have seen it in the life of the Buddha, we see in the life of Jesus, we see it in Krishna, Shiva, Ramakrishna. We see, and we could either say, well, it's present in both, or the worshippers of Devi will say that wherever love, compassion, kindness are seen, that is the power of the mother in that being manifesting itself. So rather than seeing mother or seeing the power of the goddess in gender the way we understand gender, it's not just about the difference between man and woman. It's more that it's the qualities. So if some person, irrespective of whether the person is a man or a woman or whatever gender identity they may have, if people can manifest that love and kindness, it would be to say it's the mother in their heart that is manifesting that way. Now again, it's a good question that why should it be only mother? But these are just the stereotypes that have been created of some qualities being associated with mother and some qualities being associated with father. Fathers being like dominating, strong and controlling, and mothers being this. Now we know that these are two simplistic things. It's not as if fathers cannot be loving and kind, or it's not as if mothers cannot be powerful and dominating. Well, we see the goddess here. Who could be more powerful and dominating? No male figures could stand in front of her. So to think of goddess as a female, we have to go beyond our human distinctions between male and female. So we will conclude our discussion of the Chandi now. So we have clearly, this was a very brief, quick, lightning look at the text. It's a very profound text. It needs a lot of reflection. It needs a lot of time. It's possible to take every verse or every sets of verses and reflect more and more on it. And perhaps we could do it sometime in the future. But in the time that was available to us, we did the best we could in highlighting some of the important points in these three sections. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto